Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Brian E. Roach and Zach Meckler.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Brian E. Roach, and I have less facial hair than I once did because I have trimmed my quarantine beard. And as a result, I was able to run 9-minute miles this morning, which was awesome. I'm convinced it's the beard, drag, wind drag resistance. I'm convinced that's the whole reason I was faster this morning, is I don't have the beard as nearly as much as I did. Not that matters, but I was trying to come up with something new to say at the beginning of this, and that's what came to mind. Anyway, Joe Kuzma may or may not join us at some point during this podcast, and if he does, that will be lovely. But if not, our brother from another mother, I know there's some alliteration there. I hope the alliteration in that instance doesn't bother anybody. But younger brother from another mother, Mr. Zach Meckler, the professor of football, is here, as always, to help us out when Joe and I just can't get our crap together. Zach, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. If I had to take a guess, Brian, I would say realistically that, your stuff there with the beard kind of does help with wind resistance. It's equivalent to swimmers, when they shave their arms and legs for that aerodynamic drag or whatever in the pull with the water. That's not aerodynamic, but you get my drift here.
Yep.
I'm not a swimmer. I played football. I don't know what swimmers do and don't do, but I could see the beard having a really similar effect to that. And you never know.
It's funny. We had a pool growing up, and I was a big swimmer, and I had this opportunity to go and swim for the local YMCA swim team. That could have potentially led me other places. I was a pretty good swimmer, right? I was pretty fast. But swimming and football are diametrically opposed sports, right? And you essentially, if you're going to train for swimming, you can't train for football. Bulky football muscles do not equate to long, slender, elongated swimming muscles. And I had to make a decision. Did I want to play football or did I want to swim? I chose to play football. I can't answer at this point whether that was a smart decision. It still feels like the one I should have made and feels right, but that's what I did too. Who knows?
I have no issue with that. I think you made the right move. No offense to any swimmers that happen to listen to this podcast, but I personally think you made the right move.
Me too, because I'll tell you what, I went to college with a biker, right? And so they do some of the same stuff swimmers do, which is they remove all their body hair from everywhere because it makes them faster. I'm not shaving my legs, and I'm not shaving my arms and my pits and all that. I'm not doing that crap. Not that I begrudge anybody else doing that. I don't feel the need to be a skinless or a hairless cat, so I'm not doing any of that stuff. Anyway, that's enough of wasting everyone's time for 3 minutes, and it's time to jump into what we're really here to talk about, which is related to something that one of the beat writers came out with. In this instance, it's Ed Bouchette. I actually like Ed Bouchette quite a bit. Not everybody does. I like Ed. But Ed is oftentimes has some takes that are a little off the beat or not. And this came from one of his chat sessions over at The Athletic. And the question that was asked to Ed was, in your opinion, what is the % likelihood that the following Steelers remain with the team after the 2020 season? Bud Dupree, JuJu, James Conner, Al Villanueva. And this is kind of a hot topic. It's been a hot topic. We've talked about whether we think James Conner will be there. We've talked about JuJu. We've even talked about Bud Dupree. I don't think we've really spent a lot of time talking about Al. But Ed's answer was, I think Bud Dupree has the best chance. No to Conner. Not likely to JuJu, and probably not with Al, sad to say. And what, of course, has happened to this is that instead of people acknowledging this is Ed Bouchette's opinion, they have gone off the deep end, and now are people are picking it up and running with it as a reported story. Ed Bouchette is reporting JuJu will not be re-signed, which is not what he said. He said in his opinion, he doesn't think he stays. Anyway, Zach, I know you'd love to vent on this topic, so I'm going to let you vent before we actually delve into our opinions. Again, these will be opinions on whether any of these guys are here or not. But Zach, pontificate, my friend.
I respect Ed Bouchette, like him or not. He's a guy who is well connected within the Steelers organization just for the length of time that he has been covering the team. So when it comes to people having their ear to the ground, he's one of the guys that I do respect in that regard. However, in the case of this, I know it's a slow time of the year, especially now that we don't have mini camps. We're not going to likely have OTAs in the same sense we've had them before. The entire process is going to look different. The draft is done. So what do we have to look forward now until training camp? There's not a lot. So people are pulling for any type of information. I enjoy reading things like his Asked. I like reading his opinions. I like reading like Bob Labriola's Asked and Answered. It's mailbag. I think those are things that are interesting at this time of year because you get two guys that are well versed with the team long term that have different opinions on stuff. And again, opinions on stuff. Nowhere in any of this, regardless if he has sources or not. His sources may lead him to feel that way, but it's not a report because he's not going to come out and say one way. I heard from Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert themselves, JuJu is not coming back to Pittsburgh in 2021. That was never what was said, and that's not going to be something that is said because at this point, quite frankly, with JuJu, it's too early to tell really for any of these guys because we still have a full football season to play. Now a better question would be, are they going to sign them before the season? We oftentimes see the Steelers get a contract or two done going into training camp. Guys like Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, they've had those contracts signed. I think if anyone gets it, it's going to be done. It's going to be a guy like Cam Heyward to extend him beyond this contract, help alleviate some of the hit this year, move on to the future. But to run with an opinion and try to turn it into a report is just lazy, in my opinion. You have one guy who's well respected who does report things regarding the team, but a lot of the time, just he shares his opinion based on things he may have heard. And very well, it might be true. It might be the fact that none of these guys get re-signed, and he's just answering a question based on his insider knowledge. But let's be real here. None of this was a report. A guy asked his opinion. I get asked my opinion on Twitter all the time. That doesn't mean it's gospel. Obviously, I'm a nobody in terms of Steelers connections with stuff, but opinions are just that. They're how I feel based on my knowledge of stuff, how they're going to play out. You get asked an opinion, you answer it based on your knowledge. That's all Ed Bouchette was doing here. There's not. Don't read into it and make something more that there's not, because there's plenty of people who also are well versed with the team that think JuJu will be back next year. And that's all opinion right now. And but Dupree with his situation with his franchise tag, and a guy like James Conner who, if we're being honest here, sidetrack. I think of all the four, he's the one I feel the least confident about being back in 2021. That's beside the point. You just can't read into things like this and make them into something they're not. And that's why Twitter is just a cesspool of misinformation with so many things, because you give people the access to, spew out whatever comes into their head on there, myself included. Whoever gave me a Twitter, needs to really be checked as far as I'm concerned. But, you can't read into something that's not there. There's nothing here in terms of this quote unquote reported opinion. It's just him using his ample experience to give out what he feels will likely be the case in 2021.
I couldn't agree with you more. Of course, I'm desperately trying not to say the word absolutely. And
try not to say realistically, so it's fine.
Yes, that's right. Here's the thing with all of this. As everyone knows, we've all heard the very common phrase that every blank hole has a opinion. And that's the truth. We all do. I will venture to go. It's not just Twitter that is a cesspool. It is the entirety of social media that is a cesspool. The internet itself may be a giant cesspool, but because people just feel like they can say whatever they want to say. There's no repercussions other than maybe some internet shaming that may go on. But, nobody's going to show up at your doorstep and punch you in the mouth for saying whatever you're saying, except maybe me. I might if I can find you and you tick me off, but maybe not. Probably not, because I'm older and I don't want to get arrested. But off that sidetrack, it's... You are somebody, darn it. You're the professor of football, so I needed to actually add that in. Don't sell yourself short, my friend. You are the professor of football, and there's not that I want to call any other specific Steelers site out, but there is a social disease out there that that many people feel is the best and most awesome site for Steelers information, which aggravates no end simply because we know the negatives of that particular location. And people associated with that have a tendency to do this, and it's not just them, but they run with something. This is clickbait. That's what this is, right? This is designed to lure you in to get to their site, to read their ads and get them revenue some way or another. We do similar things in the sense we want you to come to Steel City Underground. We want you to read what we write. We want you to listen to our podcast, and hopefully, that results in maybe a little teeny bit of revenue for us. We love doing what we do. We like to get something out of it other than just the satisfaction of doing it. But, realistically, we try very hard not to clickbait our stuff. Joe is very adamant about that. There's a certain level of integrity that we try and do. So I think that's why we wanted to start this podcast off by saying, look, there's nothing to this. There is no story here. But what there is viable discussion about the opinion as to whether you think any of these guys are going to come back. And actually, since you brought up the grown-ass man, I'm going to start with that too and agree with you. I think that regardless of the four people we've talked about, to me, the most likely event that occurs or the most likely contract that gets done in between now and when the season starts is an extension for Cam Heyward. And I'm on board with that in a very major way. As I've said before, the bromance is real. Cam is the man, grown-ass man. The day that if we can ever convince Cam to come on this show, I don't even know if I'll be able to talk. So be that as it may, from a Steelers standpoint, I think this makes a ton of sense. First, as you said, it's going to save them some cap space now. It spreads out that hit to when the new signed agreement starts to give them more leeway in the cap. And Cam Heyward has gotten better every year for the past 3 years, and this is a guy who's playing at a all-pro level, not just a Pro Bowl level, at an all-pro level, and he continues to dominate. He was justifiably, in my view, annoyed that he wasn't included in the current decade team that the NFL put up. He's been a force, continues to be a force. There's no reason to think he's going to decline drastically over the next 2-3 years. At some point, yes, it will catch up to him, but Cam does a great job of keeping himself in shape. He continues to improve at his craft. This is, in my mind, an easy decision for the Steelers to make. You want this guy to be a Steeler for life. You want him you never want to see him do the Franco Harris thing and show up in a Seahawks uniform or worse, a Browns uniform. We just do not need that to happen. So hopefully that's something that definitely gets done in the near future with this. Now, to move back to the four we originally talked about, look, we know that Bud Dupree has signed his franchise tag. We know that the Steelers organization, from Tomlin to Mr. Rooney to Kevin Colbert, have said that he's a priority, have said they want to keep him here long term. There is a lot of scuttlebutt that, despite what fans think, the Steelers think a lot of Bud Dupree. We have talked about this repeatedly, that Bud Dupree, again, is a guy who's on the incline, right? He's not on the downswing. He's a guy that is continuing to ascend and improve. His run defense was really good last season and has gotten better. His pass rushing has also improved, and the way that the Steelers are now utilizing these guys, and the fact that he's going to get to work with Keith Butler more directly over the next season, there's no reason to think they wouldn't want to. I think the biggest impediment to Bud Dupree signing a long-term deal is Bud Dupree. Not in the sense of, he doesn't want to do it, but in the sense that, he may want, ultra top dollar. He may think, I'm Bud Dupree and I should be able to get TJ Watt money, or something of that nature, what he expects. And because TJ Watt's going to get paid, and at some point it's going to be hard to keep them both. But if he can work out a situation where the Steelers feel comfortable with the numbers, he feels comfortable with the numbers, I think that it would certainly behoove them to try and sign Bud Dupree, throw away the franchise tag, figure out how to do a deal, get the deal done before the season starts, and do the same thing that we're talking about with Cam Heyward. Offset that huge number that the franchise tag is to spread it out over a period of time and give Bud Dupree a more lucrative deal. I'm going to ask you your opinion on something because it's something the Steelers don't do, and I've talked about this a lot in the sense that it's a soft guarantee as opposed to hard guarantees. The Steelers don't guarantee contracts, but I think the league is going that way, and they may have to adjust, and maybe it's you do it before TJ, or maybe you don't. I don't know, but at some point, I think they're going to have to start, coming on board with the idea that regardless of the fact that the Steelers generally pay their deals, they don't make a habit of, putting together a deal that ends up saving them tons of money down the road when they can cut bait and let a player walk, especially with their homegrown talent. So I think that there's a chance that maybe that could help get this kind of a deal done. But what do you think, man? What do you think about Bud Dupree? What do you think about the chances that they could sign him? I'm saying I really think it's 50-50, and the end bottom point is what does Bud Dupree want?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you look at the situation, I think the Steelers want to keep Bud Dupree. As much as fans have been against it, if they didn't see a long-term option for him, they wouldn't have exercised its fifth-year option, as you saw them do with guys like Jarvis Jones and Artie Burns. They saw enough from them to cut ship and not exercise the fifth-year option. When fans were clamoring for them to get rid of Bud Dupree, they had no problem sitting there exercising their fifth-year option on him, and now they had no problem putting a franchise tag on him, to try to work out a deal because they couldn't get one done sooner. I think those all point to signs saying that we want this guy to stay with us. Bud Dupree, when you look at his production, has not been, over the top elite edge rusher while he's been in the league. And I think that's really the biggest issue with him. He wasn't a bad football player from the get-go. If he would have been producing the way he was as a third or fourth round pick or even a second round pick, I don't think we're even having this conversation. I think the biggest thing in my mind that sticks out to people is he was a first-round pick that wasn't putting up Von Miller-type numbers. He wasn't putting up, Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa type numbers. He was putting up average numbers. He was getting 5, 6, 7 sacks here until obviously he blew up last year and got double-digit sacks for the first time in his career. I think the Steelers saw enough of him to continue improving that they wanted to keep doing this because he came into the league as a well-known raw commodity. The Steelers have a track record that's good or bad of getting underdeveloped raw guys that have all the athletic traits in the world you can work with. Like a guy like Terrell Edmonds and Bud Dupree, I think, are the two prime examples of that in recent memory, where there's a lot of athletic traits to work with, and they're taking some time to develop. Artie Burns was a similar guy as that, and obviously we saw that he never, became what the Steelers envisioned whenever he was drafted. The Steelers have a track record of doing that. Bud Dupree falls into there, so I think the Steelers want to keep giving him time to develop and get him to a point where he could become this guy that they wanted. Now, in terms of paying him, I agree that the Steelers are probably going to give him a deal. They're going to want him. They're going to give him a contract they feel is fair. They'll probably have a little bit of wiggle room. It's going to come down to, like you said, Bud Dupree and what he wants, because you look at the situation with him, market value for edge rushers that are even worth a little bit, that can get to the quarterback at all and have the athletic profile that Bud Dupree has, go for a premium, whether fans would admit that they do or not. What it comes down to is with Bud Dupree, does he want to stay in Pittsburgh, have the tandem, knowing that the Steelers are probably going to give every penny they can to a guy like TJ Watt to keep him. You're going to have a guy working opposite you that is going to help you be the best player you can be, as compared to signing with the team that doesn't have a talented defense like Pittsburgh does, and is going to have to make you the guy, and you're going to be doing it by yourself all the time. Now, the argument you hear a lot from a lot of fans is, well, he only does what he does because of TJ Watt. Who cares? Why is that a bad thing? I never understood why that's a bad thing. He's not the same type of talent as an elite top 5 pass rusher in the league, but the fact that he is as good of a run defender as he is, which is still a job for a defensive end, outside linebacker, edge rusher, sorry to break it to you guys, and he's still an effective pass rusher who we saw last year really start to take his own as a as a toolsy pass rusher. He wasn't just relying on his athleticism. He was using counter moves and breaking inside, and they weren't all just designed blitzes for him. Why is that necessarily a bad thing that he is not just flourishing because TJ Watt is also becoming a defensive player of the year candidate year in and year out more than likely moving forward? One thing I also think helped him that no one ever talks about is Keith Butler. Now, I'm not talking about defensive coordinator Keith Butler. I'm talking about outside linebacker position coach Keith Butler, who has been proven as a very solid position coach. We saw all the guys that he had worked with in previous years, like Joey Porter, James Harrison. He made Jason Wurlitz look like a guy that Steelers were going to pay $11, $12 million a year for, So this is the first year that Bud Dupree had someone not named Joey Porter be his outside linebacker coach. And I don't think that's a coincidence that it's also the year that he started to make those really major steps forward, because Keith Butler has a track record of developing outside linebacker talent. So he's a guy that Pittsburgh should want. He's a guy that the Steelers are going to have to probably pay if they want to keep him. The biggest concern is, can you afford to pay him? Can you afford to pay T.J. Watt, who I'm going to venture to guess is going to make between $18 and $20 million a year, whether you like it or not? Because that's just a going rate for a guy who's going to be a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate doing what he's doing right now at that position. And then when you have guys like Devin Bush and Minkah Fitzpatrick, who are going to also have to be paid in that window, are you going to be able to afford to keep all of them, or is Bud Dupree a guy you can let go, especially now if you feel you maybe have something with your third-round pick, Alex Highsmith? I don't know. I think a deal does get done on the Steelers' end. But like you said, it's going to come down to if Bud Dupree is going to want to take that, because he's going to get paid on the open market. He could probably venture to assume if a team if he has another year in 2020 like he had in 2019, there's going to be a team that will pay him north of $15 million a year just because they need an outside linebacker or an edge rusher, and they're desperate to get that type of talent on their team. The Steelers, I think, would probably give him between 12 and 14 million. I don't know if they'd venture north of that, knowing that they're going to have to pay TJ Watt as well. And you can think that's too much for a guy like Bud Dupree, but that's the going rate for guys that can get after the passer in a pass-happy league. You're going to have to dish out some money for them. They could do it even at an above-average level, which Bud Dupree has been in his career. Fans just never want to acknowledge it because he wasn't a consistent double-sack-a-year guy.
Absolutely. And I blew it. I did it. Absolutely. Damn. Just bite my tongue off. Maybe I'll go back and edit that. No, I don't do that. It takes too much effort. Here's the thing. That's going to be my next one. Somebody's going to tell me for saying here's the thing. So when we look at this, it just is what it is. You're right. I think that's the range that they're going to have to pay him in. And I agree with what you said. I think the Steelers will put a deal on the table. And it's just the question is whether Bud's going to sign it or not. And that is still up in the air. And that's why I put it at about 50-50 chance that it gets done. Okay. So we're about in the same place when we deal with Bud Dupree. Let's just flip it up and let's talk about Alejandro Villanueva. And, go down that road because, Big Al has been a Pro Bowl, candidate, even though I think that has more to do with his military career and the status that has given him in the league as kind of the poster boy, for service. And not that that's a bad thing. I think that's a fantastic thing. Don't get me wrong. But I think that earns Al a lot more credit sometimes than what his play does. Not that he's been bad. He's been a decent caliber, tackle. I just don't know that I think he's been a Pro Bowl level tackle consistently. I'll let you weigh in on that as well. But here's the thing. I just don't know that they're going to go and offer Alejandro Villanueva at the age that he's going to be at, because remember, he got a late start. Yes, that means he's got less tread on the tires and whatnot, but there is a point where athletic ability starts to curve off, and that's usually in the 30s for these guys, and that's where he is. So my expectation is, do I think he'll be there next year? Is he under contract right now? I can't remember. So he's got what, at least 2 more years? One more year?
2020 is his last season, and then 2021 he's an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, 2021. Is he back? They got a lot of people on the roster right now, and if one of them can take his position, I don't know. I would lean towards 2020 being the last season Alejandro Villanueva plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers, unless he decides to come back on the cheap. It doesn't get a lot of offers, on the free agent market. But again, it's a premium position, and he's played it well. Even if he hasn't played it at the level he's getting accolades for. So I kind of agree with Ed there. I think that it's unlikely that Big Al is back after this season. But again, you just never know what the market's going to be. And if the guys that they have lined up, if they feel like, ugh, you know what, we don't have what we thought we had here, then that could change. Part of it will depend on what his play is like this season. Obviously, if it downgrades at all, then I think that's going to be a real tough sell. If it elevates, if he actually gets better this year than he's been, who knows? On this one, if I'm just going to do a pass fail or a thumbs up, thumbs down, I guess I would have to give Alejandro Villanueva being in Pittsburgh in 2021 a thumbs down. So what's your opinion there?
Yeah, I mean, his cap hit in 2020 is $8.39 million, and I don't see a situation where the Steelers are going to want to re-sign him to that money beyond this season. I think it's kind of a twofold thing. I think talent-wise, he has taken a little bit of an athletic step back. I thought he struggled more in 2019 than he did the previous two seasons. That being said, he's still a starting caliber lineman in the league. It's not like he's not. It's not like he's to a point where he's like, oh, he's not good. I think he still, can, with, a full Steelers offense being healthy, he's a guy who can be a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle for you like he was in 2018 and 2017. But I think what comes down to more with it is really relying on one guy, and I think that's Chukwuma Okorafor. I think if he is able to show in 2020 that he is deserving of a starting spot, you have a guy that's on his rookie contract still. And you have a guy that I think is the only other tackle on the roster that profiles to a left tackle at all. Because I don't think Zach Banner or Matt Filer profile well as a left tackle. I think you have a guy, if he can step up, I think if he beats Zach Banner out for the right tackle spot, assuming they move Matt Filer to left guard, depending on how Kevin Dotson does. And that's the thing with the Steelers' offensive line. There's so many. The only guys right now that have solidified spots in this season are Alejandro Villanueva at left tackle, Marquise Pouncey at center, and Dave DeCastro at right guard. Everything else is a mix. Depends on how Kevin Dotson evolves. Depends on how they feel about Chukwuma Okorafor or Zach Banner. I think Chukwuma Okorafor is the guy they have the most investment in, being that he's a former third-round pick. And if he can take that right tackle spot and they bump Matt Filer to left guard and give Kevin Dotson kind of a redshirt year to learn and develop as an NFL player, you have a situation then where you could potentially bump Chukwuma Okorafor to left tackle if he performs well, which I think he's done a decent job in his opportunities.
Yep.
I think you bump him to left tackle and let him use his athletic profile. You potentially have your left tackle of the future there. You don't have to pay Alejandro Villanueva long term. And it's only because, Alejandro Villanueva is 31. He's going to be 32 going into his contract off season next year. That's a guy that's getting up there in age. He only has a couple of years left, I think, in the league anyway, regardless of the tread, just because of his athletic profile. So you have a guy that's getting ready to fall off a little bit. Chukwuma Okorafor steps up, does decently. Then maybe you have Matt Filer go back to right tackle. You can bump Kevin Dotson to left guard. And, who knows? Anything can happen. Alejandro Villanueva becomes an all-pro caliber lineman this year miraculously and does that great of a job. You see a guy they were willing to pay him. I just don't think they're going to be willing to pay him because you can't pay everybody. Someone has to go. They have premium talent in a guy like Chukwuma Okorafor, who was a third-round draft pick. That's still premium talent, in my opinion. I think anything that's top 100, top 110 is premium. So you have a guy that should be your left tackle. That's why you drafted him, is to be a starter in the third round. I think he can take that job, and Matt Filer can. I'd rather pay Matt Filer at his age long term than pay Alejandro Villanueva long term, just because of the fact that Filer, I think, was their most consistent presence on the offensive line last year. Him and DeCastro, I think, were consistently the most effective linemen. And I think Matt Filer deserves to get paid, and he'll get a better contract someplace than what we saw Chris Hubbard get and what we saw B.J. Finney get. I think if you're looking at Steelers linemen, he would get at least an $8 million, $9 million a year deal on the open market. I think the Steelers are willing to give him that type of money, if not a little bit more, if he stays with a guarantee of a starting spot. So to Villanueva's regard, I think there's too many other options on the roster that would be just as effective at this point in his career and also cheaper that make him willing to walk away, because I think there's more pressing contracts on the roster that are more necessary than what Villanueva is right now, just based on who they have. And it's no knock on Villanueva. I love him. I'd love to see him stay here if the price were to be right and keep him here on the cheap. I just think that a team will, and a guy like him who's in the back end of his career, there's going to be a team out there that's going to be willing to pay him, one last-ditch $6-7 million a year deal that desperately needs a bridge left tackle to let their guy develop. And I think he would fit well in that regard. Or maybe he'll just ride off into the sunset at that point. Who knows? But I think of those four guys, he's the one that's the most likely to probably not be re-signed going into 2021.
I would agree. And let's talk about James Conner real quick, and I do mean real quick because we may have an added guest coming on board. And so when I say this, we've talked about this to no end. James Conner, unless he has, and even if he has, I think, the season of all seasons, proves he can stay healthy, has, a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber type year, he's not going to be back. They've got too many running backs on the roster now. They've been drafting running backs the last two. I'm just like, no. My thumb is down on this. It's been down on this all along. It's one of the reasons I wanted him to pick the guy who I now can't talk about anymore. And probably one of the reasons that they did pick up McFarland is that they know, or they have to be viewing this as, this is Conner's last season. Do you see that any differently?
No, I mean, we talked about in previous podcasts. I think realistically, he plays extraordinarily well, and he still gets injured or whatever. They're not going to pay a guy because he's going to demand $5-6 million a year because he's a starting running back in the league. For a guy who gets as injured as he has been, there's no knocking his talent. If he was a healthy 16-game-a-year running back, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The Steelers would give him the money that he would deserve realistically, which would be a $6-7 million a year deal, $8 million a year deal. It's just he can't stay healthy, and they draft guys. I think they're high on Benny Snell, higher than probably most of us are. They drafted McFarland. They still have Samuels, and I'm sure they'll do it. They'll probably draft another running back, with the way they go about their business. So Conner, no offense to him, he's a great story. I just don't trust the health, and I don't see paying a guy to play 10 games, 12 games a year. If he's going to not be the guy consistently, you need someone that's going to be reliable for you. And when it comes to health, talent-wise, he's reliable. Health-wise, he's not, and that's a huge factor in getting these guys contracts. So I think, realistically, this is last year here. If he plays poorly, you're not going to pay him anyway. So,
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't really matter.
As we continue to say, availability is the best ability, and that just hasn't been there consistently enough with James Conner. Again, it's much like Alejandro Villanueva in the sense that it's a great story, a great human being. It's a kind of guy you want on your team, but at the same time, you can't afford to pay what they may want and what they may be able to get on the open market just because of that. So I think it's a bit unlikely, and we've talked about that consistently, which is why I don't want to spend that much time on it. So that brings us to the one that has clickbaited all of this, and the implications that Ed Bouchette believes, in his opinion, that JuJu is not going to be back next season. So let's look at that, and maybe before we do, we may have somebody joining us, maybe, and we will see if he can do so. I don't know. This is new. We never had an in-show guest before, have we? Somebody who joined in that. But we'll see if we can get this done. If not, we're just going to continue on. But, anyway, it's Joe. We're trying to get Joe on board because he really wants to talk about JuJu. And that's where we're at, right? We're at JuJu Smith-Schuster. And from the standpoint of what they have, and what they've done in the past, and where they really are right now, I just don't know. I don't know how likely or unlikely it is. And a lot, as you said at the very beginning of this podcast, a lot is going to depend on what this year brings. Look, there's no getting around the fact that JuJu has had a great rookie year, right? And even that there has been what you would call the inopportune fumble or two that has really caused them issues and cost them potentially games. But he's a young guy. He's still really a young guy. He's shown the kind of promise you like. Everybody loves his attitude, and he's the kind of guy you want on your team. But let's start out the question just by where they're at, right? And we're going to move into the history of the Steelers because that's a big part of this. But if you are the Steelers right now, and let's say JuJu has maybe not a breakout type season, maybe he doesn't even prove out that he should be the number one, but has a really good year, right? What do you do as the next term runs around? Because this is a guy you got in the second round, therefore there's no fifth year option. So what do you do? What do you think?
Yeah, it's I've gone back and forth on this because I know I've come across as I don't want JuJu to stay. I want JuJu to stay. I like him as a player. I like what he brings to the team. I think he's an elite number 2 receiver. And, like it or not, I think last year was so circumstantial for so many guys. I'm not looking at 2019 and sitting here saying, well, because of how that performance went, he can't be the guy. He had Ben for 1.5 games last year and then had to deal with inconsistent quarterback play. And that might not seem like a big deal, but when he takes most of his reps with a guy like Ben Roethlisberger and has very little chemistry with Duck Hodges or Mason Rudolph, you do what you can do with them. I mean, we've seen guys have issues in the past. Look at AB whenever he had Landry Jones or Mike Vick or whomever throwing the ball to him. He had a massive regression in his stats because you build up that chemistry with your quarterback. That's where you take all your first-team reps. So he was the number 1 guy last year. Ben was the number 1 quarterback. Most of his reps are going to come with those guys. The only times he doesn't is the days where Ben takes off, and then he gets Mason. And then Mason got hurt or benched, and then you had to deal with Duck for most of the year. So I'm not going to look at that because I think there's enough last year where you see the flashes of what we saw in 2019. I think drafting a guy like Chase Claypool also gives him flexibility to put him in those mismatch situations and maybe bump him more into the slot. So I think he does decently next year, which I think he will rebound. If Ben's healthy and he stays healthy, I think he rebounds. He has enough help around him, and I think he can detract some of that attention. He can do well. I think he's still a mismatch guy. I think you have to pay him, but I think the biggest issue with him is market value with receivers of any position, as far as I'm concerned, is all over the place. Positions like quarterback, if you're a quarterback and you can start for your team, you're going to get paid. That's the world we live in today in today's league. Receivers, though, you see guys who you don't expect to get decent contracts, get $10 million deals. You see guys that are great and amazing and elite receivers that are getting $16 million, and then there's guys that you never thought would get, a $20 million a year deal or $18 million a year deal. It's tough to see where JuJu would fit into that because when you're looking at his contract situation, you have to consider what he did as a rookie in 2018. And you have to consider what he did in 2019. So 2020, I think, is a huge year for him. I think his performance last year really stunted him. I think if he would have stepped up and replicated what he did in 2018, we're not even having this conversation either because he's a guy that you feel is going to come in there and be the number 1 receiver and is going to get paid the money he's worth. So I think realistically, he's a guy that should get paid, between 12 and 14, 15 mil a year. The question is there going to be a team out there that's going to look at his profile, look at his overall resume of work, regardless of what 2020 brings, and say, this guy's worth a shot. Let's give him a 2-year, 3-year, $16, $17 million deal. That might seem lucrative, but as I've said before, free agency is stupid, and teams pay a lot of guys a lot of money to do stuff. That's what concerns me, is at what level is JuJu going to value himself? Because think about it, he's young still. He's going to be on his last year of his rookie deal, and he's still a young guy who has a long career ahead of him if he can remain productive and healthy. So I think realistically, he's going to want money. I don't think there's a situation where there's going to be a long-term deal that just gets thrown out and the Steelers don't have interest. I think the Steelers will want to keep him, especially because they have Ben. So, I think realistically, You're going to want to pay him the money you want to, but it comes down to, historically speaking, look at these contracts with receivers. The Steelers have not been exactly, fruitful with second contracts on teams. You can make the argument that a lot of these guys go for greener pastures. They didn't quite live up to them. So it's kind of hard to put JuJu, because the two guys that have, in recent memory, the two guys that have gotten second contracts are Hines Ward and Antonio Brown at the receiver position. No other receiver has gotten a second contract off of their rookie deal. They've obviously brought guys like Antoine Randall back, but you're looking at Hines Ward and Antonio Brown, who are two of the best receivers in franchise history. They're in the conversation with guys like Lynn Swann and John Stallworth. Where does JuJu fit into this conversation? Is he a guy that you feel is going to eventually be in that same conversation as a Hines Ward, as a John Stallworth? Is he a guy that's going to be more of like a Martavis Bryant, Marcus Wheaton, and Antoine Randall that is very good for you, but never really becomes that elite receiver? I think that's the decision the Steelers have to make. And if they feel he can be that Hines Ward, that John Stallworth conversation, where you're looking at a guy who puts together a potentially Hall of Fame type career production-wise, I think you have an argument made that you should re-sign him regardless of what he wants. 2020 is the biggest dictator of that. If he can't produce at a high level in 2020, I don't think the Steelers are going to keep him long term. If he proves he can't be the number one, and then is he going to want to be the number two receiver to a guy they drafted after him? I don't know. He might want to try to be a number one receiver with a different team, a different offense, get a fresh start. So like we said with Bud Dupree, a lot of this comes down to how do we view him now, and how does he view the Steelers? Does he want to stay here? We don't even know that. We're assuming he wants to stay here. Not every guy that comes to a team wants to stay with that team. I think he loves Pittsburgh. I think he loves his situation here. But if he can play himself into a bigger contract elsewhere and, the Steelers lowball him, I don't know if he's going to want to stay.
So we finally got, the technical difficulties worked out with trying to get everything connected. And as a result, during your soliloquy there, Professor, our additional member, our additional brother from Other Mothers, I want to call him the older brother, but I'm the old one, and as he keeps giving me grief about.
Yes, that would be true.
Yeah, even though I can probably run further than you now. So
you might better run for your life, old man.
Yeah, I ain't that. Well, I'm a little faster than I was. I can do under 10-minute miles now, so consistently. So that was good. Anyway, you heard him. He's here, Mr. Kuzma, Wonder Boy. Maybe I'll call you Wonder Boy now. I don't know. I'm in charge.
I don't know, man.
Wonder Man? No, that sounds like Wonder Bra. I don't. It's all bad. Anyway,
I don't know, man. I'm feeling like I'm ever presently getting closer to that demographic that's fallen off a cliff with the coronavirus. So just be careful. I'm catching up to you, if not in speed, at least age, Brian. But
there you go. Anyway, here he is, Joe Kuzma, the man, the myth, the legend. How you doing, man?
Hey. It's fun to jump in on the platform I founded. Feel like a visitor. Hey, you know what? I was out and about too, and we got this all ironed out. I'm like, hey, as awkward as it is jumping in at the tail end here, Ed Bouchette's kind of out of his mind anyways, and you guys took care of those other pertinent ones. I really wanted to talk about JuJu anyways, and getting just piggybacking on what the professor said here. Who is worth a second contract besides Antonio Brown or Hines Ward? Okay, maybe Mike Wallace, but when you have Mike Wallace and AB at the same time, and you're looking at who could have been more productive at the better value of that contract, that's why Antonio Brown got it first before he became the giant diva and did what he did. But now that they're not paying anybody else, I tend to think it's like, who are you going to give the big contracts to? Probably JuJu. I still see him. I really think like some of this, it's like, where did he corroborate this between sources? Was someone talking about this offseason? Yeah, they don't have any money to spend. I don't see them restructuring any other contracts or doing anything else, but I don't necessarily see them just allowing JuJu to walk out the door. Now, some of the guys that did, you take a look at, you're talking traditionally. Let's talk about the guys who were, some of the best wide receivers over the last, I don't even know. I don't know that we want to go back to Lewis Lips, but you go back to somebody like Yancey Thigpen, for example. He got one of the biggest contracts ever from the Houston Oilers way back when for God knows how much money. Hold on, I had it up here. Because, I was going way back. He got in 1998, he got a 5-year, $21 million contract. At the time, was the highest known contract ever signed among wide receivers.
Yeah.
So... that's just, and of course did they become the Titans at that point too? And, all that stuff.
Close
but
to it,
they're not going to match that kind of money. At the tail end of the 90s they were still struggling to even find a quarterback. You had a guy like Charles Johnson who maybe never really was that big name wide receiver. So you're really talking about what kind of guys from this period of time. It's pretty much I don't know. Hines Ward arrived just before Ben did, and so did Plaxico Burress. So you had to pick between one of those two guys. Well, this is where we were just at, fellas. They were, Antonio Brown was probably going to be on his way out anyway. We were talking about age 31, fall off a cliff, and he was arriving at that point anyways. JuJu being younger, he was already jealous. You go back just a year ago, and the things we were talking about was replacing Antonio Brown, not sending JuJu off to pasture. It seems a little silly to me. So they had to make a choice between Ward and Plax way back when. And I don't know that Ward, I would have to compare the numbers, but Plaxico was probably the shinier toy. The only other guys that really come into this conversation, in my opinion, on the same level, Santonio Holmes, who, got in a little bit of trouble, got a little bit of a suspension for maybe the wacky tobacco or whatever it was, and went to the Jets. So he never had an opportunity for that second contract anyways. And then, of course, Mike Wallace is the big one. And I guess you throw Manny Sanders in there a little bit too. But when you had that, the Young Money crew with AB, Mike Wallace, and Sanders, you can't pay all three of those guys the young money that they want, you know what I mean? So I still think they made the wisest choice out of all of that. So if they do decide that they're going to move on and go somewhere else other than JuJu, I would still trust what the organization does for the same reason Zach said, because a lot of these guys, when they leave Pittsburgh, you could count on one hand how many players have had success in their post-Steelers career.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't disagree with you either. It's... The question that comes into play here is because it feels like there's a slightly different dynamic. Right now, there are a lot of guys on this team who are young and are going to need to get paid real soon. And we've talked about some of them being T.J. Watt. You're talking about Bush. You're talking about Minka. You're talking about maybe Bud. There are some severe contracts that are going to come up. And the question will be, and I kind of feel this way. I can't really dispute anything you're saying, and both Zach and I definitely agree that the kind of receivers who get paid by the Steelers and get that second contract have tended to be the ones that are in the elite echelon of Steelers history receivers. But if JuJu can go out on a second contract, since he doesn't have a fifth-year option after 4 years, and be the young guy that he is and convince a team to pay him, double what the Steelers can potentially offer when they're trying to fit all these other guys in as well, I just don't know. Now, Zach has said this, and I agree with this. It boils down, I think, in a lot of ways to what he does this season. If he can show out, right? If he can have the kind of year he had early on, that I think part of that, it's not even a question. It'll be impactful on what they eventually decide to do. But what if Chase Claypool has a JuJu rookie season and JuJu doesn't have a JuJu rookie season, and you look at it that way.
Inconsequential in my opinion, because he's got another 3 years beyond that.
Well, Claypool does. I agree.
Yes.
But I mean, if you're looking at that and you're saying, okay, what is JuJu's take on that? And when it comes time to do a deal, and the Steelers are saying, okay, well, we just paid TJ, and we have to pay Minka, and we have to pay other guys coming up. We're going to offer you a deal. It's going to be a nice deal, because I believe they absolutely will. I believe they'd like to keep him. We'd all like to see him stay. But what if it's receiver 2 money? and not receiver one money because they look at what he's been able to do and go, this is where we think you fit. Is that what JuJu wants, and is that what he takes? It's kind of like what we said early on with Bud Dupree, which is we both came to the same place. We think the Steelers will make him an offer that is more of a long-term offer. The question will be whether it's the money he wants or not. And if it's not, then they won't do it. And if it is, then they will. So, I mean, that's the caveat I put on that.
My only problem with that is I don't see the Steelers just spending heavily on only defense, and we're still, okay, TJ's the more immediate. Minka's down the road, and when you start to look at Ben Roethlisberger's 38, he's making a lot of big bucks. That's where the top-heavy side of the offense is. They're not paying a Bell. They're not paying a Brown. They're likely, as you guys were saying earlier, not going to pay James Conner. So you're going to have younger, cheaper rookie contracts in your backfield. You may say goodbye to Alejandro Villanueva, go cheap there too, younger, I should say, not necessarily cheap, but cheaper, younger, something in that relative ballpark there. Who knows how much longer Marquise Pouncey's going to be around? I expect the Castro to be around for a little bit. So those are your bigger contracts. You look at both of the tight ends too, with Vance McDonald or Eric Ebron. Vance has got a year or two left. Ebron signed a 2-year deal. So when you're looking within this span, those guys have a year left where JuJu's coming into maybe a new contract in 2021. I think there's some money on the table for him.
Yeah, but here's my question to that end, though, too, Joe, is the fact that you look at the defensive talent and the offensive talent. Long-term, the defense seems to have the pieces there that they know they're for sure without a doubt. I mean, there's no questioning right now that Devin Bush, Minka Fitzpatrick, T.J. Watt, Dupree, those are all guys they want to have in their long-term deals. When you look at, the receiver position, I mean, in my mind right now, the only two guys that have the receiver one upside are JuJu and Deontay Johnson. I think Deontay Johnson can be not an A-B receiver, but a guy that could be a number one guy because you can move him around the field. He can be your mismatch machine because he is such a good route runner and is an ascending running receiver as long as he can keep up this route. Let's say we have a situation where Deontay Johnson continues to build upon his year last year. Like Brian said, Claypool ends up having a phenomenal rookie season. And who's to say that James Washington, who was a very productive, for whatever reason, we never talk about James Washington. I don't think James Washington's the number one receiver, but I thought he had a very productive second half of last season. Everyone wants to talk about that. He was the deep play threat they drafted him to be. What happens if we have a situation where the Steelers feel good enough with their receiving core beyond JuJu, where if JuJu talks himself into a contract that's more expensive what the Steelers are comfortable with, it's not as if they don't have the receiving talent on the roster. JuJu is, in my mind, the best receiver on the roster, and he's young. I said this before. He's young, has plenty of career left. He has another 10 years if he wants to, realistically, as long as he stays healthy and productive in this league, whether or not that's all Pittsburgh. If it comes to a situation where he doesn't play up to that level, I don't think it's inconsequential. I think it's a situation where he doesn't play receiver one talent. You're not going to pay the guy just because you haven't been paying people on your offense. They're not going to pay guys just to pay guys. They're going to pay guys that they want to have produce at that level, and they expect a lot from a guy who's their quote-unquote number one, because I think that really doesn't mean as much you give it credit to, because the Steelers move their guys around. It's not like the number one has to be the X, the number two has to be the Z, their slots, their number three. The Steelers don't use that mindset as much. I don't think you pay a guy just because you're not paying as many guys on your offense as you are on your defense if they haven't earned that money. I do think they want to keep JuJu. I want to keep JuJu. Not that my opinion has any bearing on what the Steelers do with their day-to-day operations. But I think they'll work to keep him if the price is right. I don't think they're going to roll out the brakes truck just because of the fact that they're paying all these guys on defense while we're not paying anyone on offense. If JuJu doesn't play as a number one or doesn't put up the level you'd expect from your number one guy, you're not going to pay him a $17 million a year deal. They're going to give him an offer, but it's not going to be necessarily wide receiver one money. Is JuJu going to want that type of contract, especially if the Steelers don't give him the contract that he feels is warranted, if they feel good about what else is left on the receiver depth chart, and knowing that if there's one, there's three guarantees in life: death, taxes, and the Steelers are going to draft the receiver. And if they draft the receiver, again, if they're going to, regardless of what they do with JuJu, do they feel good enough moving on from there? So I don't think it's inconsequential. I do think a lot of what happens in 2020 is going to dictate how confident they feel about him moving forward and how much money they're going to give to him. Because I don't think he's another Marcus Whedon. I don't think he's another, Martavis.
Oh, no way.
No, not at all. And that's why I think it's tough when you compare. As I made this comment at the very beginning, it's tough when you compare the situations with like AB and Heyward, who were no question, there was no one else on the roster. They were the dudes. They let Mike Wallace walk because of that. They let guys like Plexico Burris walk. I think there's situations where those guys were no question there. But I think the difference is they have a depth chart that I think by end of 2020 could be a lot closer in talent than what we saw with those respective depth charts whenever AB was in his contract year and then when Heyward was in his contract year. So, I think it's tough. It's going to be where does he fall into that spectrum? Because right now he's not an AB talent, and I think he's more on pace with where Heyward was at this point in his career. But where do we put that? Where do we value that type of mindset? Is he going to be a guy that we want to dish out $16 million, or is he a guy that we think is going to get 18 on the open market? He's going to want to test the free agency unless they give a franchise tag on him. And are we going to be able to compete with that? And do we want to compete with that to that level? So I don't think it's inconsequential. I think there's things that are going to vary. If he puts up together an 2018 season, you're going to pay him the money because you're not going to want to let that go in free agency, especially with Ben needing a good weapon that he relies on. I guess while I still have the floor here, that's another thing that is important too, is how is Ben going to develop? Because we didn't see Ben with Deontay Johnson last year, really. We didn't see him develop with James Washington whenever James Washington finally hit his stride at the end of the season. And we have no idea what Chase Claypool is going to be like. So do you want to take away Ben's one trusted weapon because of that? I don't know. And that's the one thing that kind of pushes me towards the sign JuJu thing no matter what, because of the fact that that's Ben's weapon right now.
That was the reason Antonio Brown got mad and packed up his bags and left town.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that pushes you towards, well, maybe no matter what happens, and that's where I would agree with you there. No matter what happens, that's Ben's guy. And I think how Ben develops with guys like Johnson, Washington, and Claypool is going to depend on how you can let him go. If he develops a chemistry and trust with these guys, like last year we saw Mason and Duck develop with guys like Deontay Johnson and James Washington, then maybe that changes it. But right now, as we're doing this podcast, we don't know those things. We only know that Ben does have a chemistry that has been proven with JuJu that should push the Steelers to want to keep Ben happy in that regard.
Yeah, and I wish I could have found the actual breakdown, but neither Spot Track or Over the Cap seem to break down. I can't find historical breakdowns, but I know this for a fact because someone had written an article many, many moons ago about we're going back to, Casey Hampton, James Harrison, you had Woodley, you had Polamalu, and they somehow always found a way to almost have a 50-50. It might not have been exact. It might have been like 52-48 split with their spending, but I think the Steelers still try and balance it out. Unfortunately, the top-heavy part, like I said, is Ben right now. Yeah. And the other thing you got to see, too, is you're like, oh, man, all of this is going toward the defense. They're going to have to pay TJ. Eventually, you're going to have to pay Minka. Well, does that mean Terrell Edmonds gets a fifth-year option? Does Terrell Edmonds get a second contract? Joe Hayden, how much longer does he play? Do the Steelers retain Steven Nelson as well, or do they make a choice between each of those guys? So I still think it still goes back to the tried and true Steeler way of you build through the draft. So they're going to still be reloading, and I think they have time. And as we've said through all of these draft shows, they didn't have a whole lot of holes that they had to fill to begin with. So we'll see. Maybe the Claypool thing is a little bit of insurance just to see what happens with JuJu too. You never know. I mean, I don't know that if he has a down 2020 season that he's devalued in any way either. I think there's still teams that'll throw some money at him. Maybe not Jerry Jones, Amari Cooper money, but it's, I think it'll be a fair contract regardless.
I would agree with what you just said. I think that is a part of what plays into whether the Steelers can afford to keep him or not, or are willing to keep him at the money that they have. If he has a down season in 2020, there will still be offers. The question will be, will those offers come from the Steelers? Are they going to see it the same way, especially if that room provides them with a level of comfort? I'm with both you guys in the sense that I want them to keep JuJu. I think that they want to keep JuJu. The question will just be if the offer that they try to keep him with is not the offer that he wants or expects or thinks he deserves. And if that's not the case, I agree with Zach's statement. I don't think they're going to pay him just to pay him, right? I don't think they're going to pay JuJu just to keep that balance at around 50-50 offense-defense just because they have the money, because that's just not what they do. They'll make the offer they think is fair. They may have some room that they move on, but it won't be, if they're $8 million apart, then it's not going to happen. It just seems unlikely. And that's why I do think that the season is consequential to what the long-term expectations for him are. But way we've been doing this, Joe, is basically giving a thumbs up, thumbs down to whether we think these guys are here post 2020. And so I'll let you catch up because we've done our others. So Bud, what's your up down on Bud?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Big Al.
Oh, that could be that's like in the middle where you're waiting for Julius Caesar Erectus or whatever his name was from Gladiator.
Yeah.
And then and eventually, I'm in the middle, and then it's going to go a little down here because I feel there's going to be a youth movement a little bit on the offensive line, and depending on money talks. And what I'm going to get at here is go ahead with the other names because I'm looking at 2021 here, and I'm looking at cap space of $28.1 million right now on over the cap. So I got some ideas.
All right, James Conner.
I don't see it. He would have to play all 16 games and be the bell cow and prove he could do both in order for them to really. And what kind of contract? Every single team that's done one of these contracts, maybe Ezekiel Elliott he still hasn't been as good. You know what I mean? He was still good, but he didn't have the big phenomenal year last year that he had before getting paid. Bell, Devontae Freeman, who else? I mean, or you could name several of them. These guys, they all kind of flamed out on these contracts weren't worth what they got paid. So Connor would have to be coming back relatively cheap. I'm not even talking about $8 million. I'm talking about less.
Yeah, and then JuJu. I'll let you start it because Zach and I haven't said yet.
Well, I'll throw the bombshell on you. If they do this deal with Dupree, T.J. Watt's a fifth-year option. They have tags available, folks. You know what I mean? So if it really comes down to control and they want to control a contract, I know we're talking about an awful lot of money, but they could always slap the franchise tag on him if need. So I'm going to go thumbs up. I think any which way, I don't know that they let him out the door. I'm like about 90% of the way there. There's like a little bit in the back of my mind only because of what Zach said. Brian, you've talked a little bit of sense into me too, but I don't listen to you. So I think he's around for long term.
All right, Zach, what's your thumbs up, thumbs down on JuJu?
Well, speaking of I thought about the franchise tag too, as a potential option. The only reason I'm potentially weary about that is the fact that, it gives you the year of control. The franchise tag value for 2020 for receivers was $17.8 million.
Yeah.
So if you're going to give him the franchise tag for that, it's the same thing with Bud Dupree. I don't think Bud Dupree gets a contract off from the Steelers that is the same value per year annually that we saw from the franchise tag. So I think we're giving the franchise tag. It's purely for the control. And potentially if Ben's last season is 2021, at least gives you him one more year. And then at that point, you're just like, well, whatever, because then you have to worry about paying James Washington potentially or Deontay Johnson. So I think you have a situation where that could be the option. My thumb is going in the middle, but I still, in my gut, I want to see JuJu stay, and I want to see him be a Steeler long term, and I want to see him I think he is a number one receiver. Well, there's a lot of the national media thinks that he's not. I'm going to give a little bit of it's a very half-hearted thumbs down just because of the fact that I think there's merits to both sides. I just think until I see what happens in 2020 with him on the football field, I think it's going to be more of a thumbs down for me, and I hope I'm wrong. I'm happy to be wrong in a situation like this. I just have to go with my gut.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I honestly want JuJu to stay. I think JuJu can be the guy they want to be. I think his youth plays into it. I think the long-term impacts of what he can be. But if he has a down year, it's really going to be hard for them if everybody else in the room has had an up year. I mean, what if they're terrible? Who knows? But I think I think it'll be a lot like Dupree. I think they'll make him an offer. I think they will try to keep him, and it will come down to whether JuJu feels like he can. That the offer is what he wants or is deserving of, and maybe if he has a down season, he feels like, all right, I'll take a short-term deal. because I want to prove that I deserve that long-term deal. I mean, there's always that option in there. They could always come back with, instead of saying, okay, we're going to give you a 5-year deal, we'll give you a 2-year deal, and just add it as an extension, give you another 2 years, and then see what transpires. And he might be willing to buy that because, again, you got 2 down seasons in a row. That does impact your value to a certain extent. And Joe, I just got to give you credit. You hit the nail on the head with the running back thing. Man, when's the next time somebody's going to dish out $60 million to a running back after what's happened, with Gurley and with Le'Veon and Zeke?
Yeah, Gurley. There's the other one I missed.
I mean, it's just, forget it.
They're about to do it right now. It's Derrick Henry, man.
Yeah, and they will because he's produced. But, man, what happens when that contract burns out? You're going to have so many teams leery of paying running backs again. These 3 guys that wanted to reset the running back market may end up in the long term resetting it down.
Well, and that's there's the other guy. Melvin Gordon sat out.
Yep,
and he's got a $16 million, a 2-year $16 million. So it's $8 million a year. He's not even in the double digits. The only guy who's been worth the $10 million or whatever that he got in his way back when was Adrian Peterson.
Yeah. Absolutely. So anyway, I didn't give my thing. I think I'm a very mild thumbs up, but it's a bad season and it goes back down. So I because I'm speaking with my heart there than my head. I want him to stay. So it's a mild thumbs up. And now we've been here for a while, Joe. I'll give you the last chance to add anything you want since you joined late, man.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at all the receiver contracts, average per year right now. Julio Jones, 22, Cooper, 20, Michael Thomas, 19-2. This is full contract average per year currently. So then you still have A.J. Green, who just got tagged, right?
Yeah.
Odell Beckham, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Adam Thielen is still in the $16 million range, DeAndre Hopkins, Brandon Cooks, Jarvis Landry at 15, Devontae Adams at 14, Stephon Diggs, Allen Robinson, Alshon Jeffrey, T.Y. Hilton. I mean, this is the going rate. I mean, you're looking at almost like the top 12 or 15 right there, and everybody's in 13 plus. So I think that's what you're pretty much going to be looking at something like that. I know there's some guys like Keenan Allen or Tyler Boyd that I'm looking at this. It probably averages out differently either on the front end or back end of those contracts. So I don't know, depending on what you do with JuJu, 3 years. I don't know. You were already talking about like a tag and then an extension, an extra year or something like that. But I don't see the one thing I could see with all the, the so-called clickbait articles and things like this getting, and it spread like wildfire. And we're all like, with JuJu, it's not going to happen right now. And like you said, there might be bigger fish to fry, like a Cam Heyward or somebody like that, where I understand, he's getting a little up there, but he's going to be playing for a while too, and he's like the voice on that defense. And that's a guy that you're going to keep there. He's probably a higher priority due now. Obviously, Bud Dupree is going to be a higher priority because it's a franchise tag deal. So where does JuJu fall into that? It's just he's going to have to wait his turn, take a number, and that's probably going to happen in 2021 if the Steelers so feel inclined and they look at at the tag numbers. And who knows who's going to be let go, traded, and everything else here. A.J. Green, that $18 million could come out of there. Odell Beckham could be coming out of there with the Browns if he has a bad whatever year. Julio Jones retires. That could take some a little off the top and make the franchise tag a little more palatable, but also having the salary cap go up and having some more money in your pocket to spend. I think they could get something done.
All right. Well, as you like to say, that puts us up against things
Yes.
time-wise. And this is going to be weird for you, man. You got to deal with my sign-off. It can't be yours.
I know. It's great, man. I love it too. I listen to it often. Even you guys don't realize I do tune in and listen when I'm not on the show. Just sometimes our schedules don't line up. So
Absolutely.
It is what it is.
So, Zach, as always, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you always being there as our younger brother from another mother. Joe, I'm glad you jumped on.
Me too.
And as I said earlier, I'm no longer the host who whatever. Now I'm just the host who has less beard. And we'll go from there. So that's going to wrap it up for the Steel City Underground podcast. Until next time, everybody, as you know I like to say, it's chaos out there, so be kind.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.